Today we're going to get this forgotten Ford Model T up and running after it's been sitting for a number of years and hopefully prove that even an idiot like me with almost zero mechanical ability can work on these amazing machines. So let's talk about the Ford Model T, produced from 1908 through 1927. It's the car that mobilized much of America. We're talking 15 million made in nearly a 20-year period, and we just bought this one, a non-runner, for $8,000. That's the first myth I see a lot about Model Ts, is that folks think they're expensive museum pieces, and while a lot of them are in museums, they're just not worth a whole lot because they built so many millions of them. Even a nicely restored version like this can be had for around $10,000, of course worth more if it runs, which this one doesn't. So let's tell you the story behind this particular Model T. This is a 1927, so this was right at the end of the production run of Model Ts. We bought it from a wonderful woman who got it from her father, inherited it when he passed away. He had something like 6 Model Ts, a real man of my own heart. When I first got into this hobby, a wise man once told me that you could never have just one old Ford, and he was right, because now we have 3. It's not an addiction. I can stop at any time, I promise. Now, even though a lot of the technology in the Model T is the same from 1908 through 1927, there were a ton of subtle changes over the years to make these cars more reliable, more livable, and most importantly for Ford, cheaper to manufacture. So we have a 1915 Model T in the garage, which is a brass era T. And if you look at them from a distance and you squint, they look the same. But if you really start poking around, things are actually very different. So starting with the design, these later Ts have obviously lost the brass. They also have some physical changes. So this is a much taller radiator and a much taller hood than the early Model Ts. We're also going to find different fenders on this model. And crucially, this is a really big safety improvement. Most 27s are going to come equipped with steel wheels versus the earlier cars which had wooden wheels. So from a drivability standpoint, this makes them more reliable and quite a bit safer at making turns. Now, they built 405,000 Ts in 1927. So even though this was right at the end of the production run, folks were still buying these cars in huge quantities. Now, this is obviously a truck, or is it? Something leads me to believe this is not actually a factory original Model T truck. Now, they were called roadster pickups, and they're pretty rare. Of those 400-some thousand made, roughly 27,000 were the pickup bodies. What we see here is a wooden bed, and I believe the roadster trucks all came equipped with steel beds. And then if you look at the bulkhead here, you're going to notice the stamped design. I think, if I recall, the roadster trucks had a flat bulkhead in the rear. So what this is actually very typical of Model Ts. This probably would have started life as a runabout, which is what that black car in the barn is, which meant it had a trunk, or as Model T folks call it, a turtle deck, which was easily removable and replaced with a wooden bed of your choosing. And there's actually rumors that's why these trucks were called pickups to begin with, because you could pick up a bed of your choice from a catalog or from a store, or just build one and turn your coupe or your roadster into a little truck, which is pretty cool. So does that deteriorate the value? A little bit. A roadster truck would be worth more than a converted runabout, but look, it's a 100-year-old vehicle. It's still very cool, and unless you're at a Model T show, folks are not really going to care. But let's talk a little bit more about this car. So I really like the finish on this dark blue with the black painted fenders. All 27s had the black fenders. And then the coolest part about this vehicle is, of course, full convertible. In 27, they also had 2 doors, so you have both a passenger and a driver door. We also have a key, which is a big improvement over our 15, which has no key whatsoever. And there's a bunch of mechanical changes with these later Model Ts as well. So let's go ahead and pop the hood and show you those. This video series is brought to you by our friend Scott O'Sullivan at O'Sullivan Law. Now, Scott's a great guy. Unfortunately, he's enabling me to make bad decisions with old Model Ts, but he is genuinely interested in helping his clients. He's a leader in personal injury. He also does a lot of work over at Rider Justice. If you're on a motorcycle and have an accident, you gotta call Scott first. Linked in the description below. A great guy and a really good friend. So this is gonna be very similar to other Ts, the way you open the hood, but underneath the hood, we're going to find a number of differences. Now, first thing you're going to notice is the coil box. So 4 individual coil boxes, 1 for each cylinder. In the older cars, they were mounted underneath the dashboard. In the later cars, they were mounted underneath the hood. We're also going to find our fuel valve is located here because the fuel tank is also located in the cowl, whereas in the earlier cars, they were located underneath the seat. And there's going to be your fuel filler. Now, looking at this from an initial evaluation, it looks like we've got everything intact in place. Got the carburetor where it's supposed to be, coil boxes, got 4 spark plugs, albeit a little bit rusty. Yeah, it doesn't look too bad. Now, I'm not quite sure when the last time this vehicle ran. The previous owner said maybe a year and a half, couple of years ago, and they said they tried to get it running and they couldn't. So Case and I ended up pushing this car on the trailer till we could get it back here and take a better look at it. But everything kind of seems to be where it's supposed to be. Let's come on over to this side, check out the driver's side of the engine. All right, so we can see that this car has an aftermarket water pump on it. And let's see. Yeah, that fan belt feels a little bit too loose. We're not seeing a lot of movement in that water pump. Maybe it's seized, but I think there's a good shot. That fan belt's just a little bit too loose. Steering column, some electronics. This vehicle does have electric headlights. It has a stoplight as well. No more kerosene lights like some of the older Model Ts. So they really brought these cars into the 20th century and out of the 19th century, if you will. But let's get it in the garage and see if we can't get her to sputter and fire. Now, I am by no means a Model T expert or a mechanic of any kind. I barely know how to tie my shoes in the morning. But that's what's great about these old cars from the pre-war era is they're so simple to work on, especially Model Ts, and there's such a wealth of knowledge online that can really help you out. So that's basically my credentials. Now, I imagine a good place to start is to see if we have oil in the engine. Take a look at what that looks like. Now, to check the oil on a Model T, you actually have to get down underneath the car, and they do build sticks, which kind of help this process a little bit. But basically, what we got here are 2 petcock valves, and the oil level is supposed to be in between them. So to check the oil, we're actually going to turn this upper one, and if oil comes out, we know we have plenty in the car. And if it doesn't, we'll add some more. And the sellers did say they changed the oil right before they sold it, but let's see if we've got oil where it needs to be. Oh yeah, perfect. Streaming out. So we got plenty of oil in the car, and of course on a Model T, the engine oil and the transmission share the same casing. So it's all shared oil, so it's important that you got plenty for both those important components. So the next thing we're going to do is see if the engine is free. It's always a helpful step. So we're going to put the parking brake on, and that's going to do 2 things. It's going to engage the rear brakes and also put the transmission into neutral. And then we can come around to the front of the car before we mess with the electric starter. I know, luxury compared to that old girl. We can actually get down to the front of the car, see if that engine's free. It's going to turn. Oh yeah, it's definitely free. Also feeling a little stiff though. Okay. Yeah, definitely. Got a lot of compression, but it's not turning as smooth as I'd like. Now, when these cars sit for a long time, things can get a little stuck in the transmission. These have a planetary gear set with a series of clutches, and it's a pretty cool setup, but if they sit for a long time, we can actually get too much drag in the transmission. It's also worth noting the engine's been sitting in the same place for a long time, so it might be worth pulling some spark plugs, sticking some Marvel Mystery Oil down the chamber, and then letting that sit for a little bit before we start cranking on it. Yeesh. Well, it doesn't look great. Kind of looks like it came off of the bottom of the Titanic, so that's going to be on our wish list, I think, is some new plugs. So Marvel Mystery Oil, and it certainly is a mystery to me. I don't even begin to understand how this works, but someone told me once when I had a stuck engine that if you stick this down your spark plug holes, let it sit overnight, it'll free it up. And it did. And then a lot of folks on the Model T forums say that this stuff works wonders. So, oh, let's see what happens. Put a dabble in there. cool. I got none in there, but I got it all in the exhaust manifold. That'll make a nice little fire. Sweet! So we're gonna let that sit, do it to the other 3 cylinders. And while that's doing its mystery stuff, we're gonna check out some other stuff on this T. All right, let's talk about the ignition system. Now, this car does have a battery and electric start. Wahoo! Unlike our 1915, that should make starting this car a lot easier. Now, the sellers did buy this new battery for it, which is great, but it is a 12-volt battery, which can be a little hard on the Bendex in the starter. So we went ahead and actually tracked down a 6-volt. Model Ts have a negative ground, which is confusing because Model As have a positive ground. But that's all hooked up, and let's see if we have some power going to the coils now. The ignition system in a Model T is very different than, say, like a 1960s or 70s Ford. Instead of having a typical distributor, what we have instead are 4 individual vibrating coil boxes or trembler coils or buzz boxes, whatever you want to call them. They're energized. It's all timed to a spark timer, and they get voltage. They shake and make sounds, and then they make high voltage to the spark plugs. Terrible explanation of how they work, but that's the 5-year-old version. But we can actually hear if they're working, if we're getting power to the buzz boxes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna come in here. Well, first of all, let's just see if we've got power to the horn. Sweet, okay, good news. We got 6 volts to the horn. And if I turn that key and take this microphone, you can actually hear that coil firing. And if I go ahead and rotate the engine slowly, it's gonna shut off. And then when it's time for another coil to engage, you can hear a slightly different squeaking noise. So we know we're actually getting power to the coils. They're buzzing like they should. So likely we're getting power to the spark plugs, and all great news. So now we're ready to talk about the fuel system. Oh man, we're cranking through this thing. So we know it's got some compression, we know it's got some oil in it, we know it's got power, we know we've probably got spark. Let's talk about the fuel system now. This could not be any simpler. There's a tank in front of the occupant cell, and it's an official test. It's got quite a bit of gas in it. And it doesn't smell super varnishy, which is awesome. It actually doesn't smell varnishy at all. It smells great. So, look, it smells so good to the fact where I don't really think we need to drain the fuel system. I'm just going to put some brand new fresh gas in here. And then we're gonna see how that carburetor looks. So this could not be any easier. We got our fuel shut off here. That should be on, and that is a direct gravity fed system right to the carburetor. Now I think, let me grab this, let me look at the marking on this. This I think is an NH carburetor. So a 27 would have had a carburetor design called a vaporizer carburetor, but this does have, it looks like a Holley NH, which is a pretty common retrofit because the vaporizer carburetors are really bad. Now I probably should drain the fuel out of it, but I'm gonna take a chance and at least try to get it kicking and sputtering on the fuel that's in there and this carburetor without a rebuild. But one thing we can check is let's make sure we're getting fuel into the carburetor, and that's pretty simple. So we actually have a drain on the bottom of the bowl, and if we just crack that with the fuel on, we should have a nice steady fuel flow. And yep, we do. So we know we have fuel in the carburetor at the very least. And that's pretty much all you need to get a T to run. A little bit of fuel and a little bit of spark, and what, 3-4 to 1 compression? And off to the races at 14 miles an hour. So talking about the controls in the T, well, some stuff is familiar and other stuff is completely foreign. Obviously, we do have steering wheel, no power steering, and it does have, looks like they changed the ratio over the years to be less twitchy than the old ones, which is a good call. We've got our on switch here, and this has got a couple of positions. So left is actually to run the engine off of the battery, but if I switch it to the right, that's going to then run the engine off of the magneto. So the way you start these cars is you get them running, get them idling, and then you switch them to mag when they're going. We also have our headlight switch here. We've got our amp gauge there. We've got a little light so you can see at night. And then this doubles as our choke when we pull it out, and then it also adjusts the fuel mixture so we can make it richer or leaner on the fly. So we're probably gonna add just a little bit more fuel to that carb for starting. Then we got 3 pedals on the ground. This right pedal is not the gas pedal, that's actually the brake pedal. The left pedal is gonna be our gear selector. So we've got down for first, middle is neutral, and then all the way up for second. Feels like that could maybe use some adjustment. And then the middle pedal here is actually reverse. So once again, that feels like it could probably use some adjustment. I think it's getting caught up on this little rubber mat. So that's all very foreign. And then up here in the steering column, we've got throttle with the right stick, spark advanced with the left stick, and the little Claxton horn over here in the steering column. And that's it. That's all the controls in a Model T. So what we're gonna do now is try to spin this engine over. So I'm gonna go battery, parking brake on, spark all the way retarded. We're gonna crack the fuel, and then the starter button is down here by my foot. And moment of truth. Ooh. So we are getting some movement out of that engine, but you can hear it's super stiff still. So I'm thinking what's happening is we're still getting some friction, I'll say, in the transmission that's holding us up. So I'm gonna use an old Model T trick. We're actually gonna jack up the rear of this car and put the transmission into high gear or second gear, and then basically run that engine directly to the rear wheels, but with the rear wheels off the ground, we shouldn't have any friction. It's a little sketchy, but hopefully we can free up what's getting caught up in that transmission there, and then after we heat cycle it, the next couple times starting should be much easier. So I think that's what's going on, but let's get it up on the lift and get those rear tires in the air. So when you're jacking up the rear end of a Model T to do this, you only need to get one tire in the air because these things have open differentials, and that's good enough. But our friends at RMPS Automotive Lifts have sent us this fantastic 4-post, so why not use it? You got it, might as well use it. So we're gonna jack up the rear diff. Now, the crazy thing about Model Ts is that rear diff, the axle tubes are like close to 2 feet in the air, and I don't have enough height on my bridge jack here, so we're gonna use a couple of blocks just to help us get a little bit of extra height out of them. The last piece to our puzzle is the cooling system. Now, originally Model Ts used a thermo-siphon cooling system with no water pump, and the way these work, super cool. Hot water enters the top of the radiator, and then as it flows through the channels, it cools down, enters the bottom, and it essentially, through the magic of physics, makes a loop and keeps the engine cool. This one has a water pump added, which kind of acts as like a water wheel to speed things up. Whether or not it does, that's a big debate among Model T people, but we're gonna put some water in the radiator. Now, I'm going to put coolant in this thing eventually, but just to take it down the road, I'm just gonna stick some water in it. Now, you don't wanna fill these all the way up. You kinda wanna stop right at the top of the rods in the radiator to allow some space for expansion with the cooling tank. And then there's actually a little overflow tube here. So what I find works the best is if we cover up this overflow tube, and then we just slowly add it till we're at the right level. All right, rear wheels are in the air, front tires are chocked, transmission is in high gear, so it should be a direct, unobstructed drive now from the crank to the rear wheels, which should make this easier to turn. And in fact, it does. So, I would call that a success. That alarming noise is the rear wheels spinning on the jacks there. Coils on, spark down, throttle up. We're gonna choke it. Gonna No, I don't want to put a foot on the brake because it's going to slow things down in the transmission. So hopefully we don't go flying into the back of our garage. Oh, I think she's going to do it. So the car's running, albeit a little rough. We adjust the spark here, adjust the fuel a little. We're going to smooth it out. And now I'm going to flick at the mag. Let's see if the magneto works. And you can see it smooths out because on battery we're only running at 6 volts, but on magneto we can do way more than 6. This is great news. So I say we get it off the lift. Well, it was going really well. We'll get it running again, get it off the lift, and then take it for a spin. So interesting problem. So I don't think we're getting fuel into this sediment bowl here. Oh, there we go. Alex is right, we had the fuel off. Our fuel valve is a little persnickety. So probably helped to have fuel in the carburetor. So now that we have diagnosed that this needs to be a little bit past 6 o'clock, and we have fuel getting to the carb, let's see if that has any effect on how she runs. This is so sketchy having this thing in the air like this, but until we get that transmission a little more freed up, this will have to do. So we see the rear wheels are spinning, but we're going to find as I take it out of high gear into neutral, RPMs are going to change as things start to bind up, and then that's going to be parking brake on. Adjust the fuel mixture just a little, lean it out a bit. I would say that's 4 cylinders running pretty good. So let's get it off the lift and see if it'll actually drive. All right, let's see if we got reverse gear. Oh, hey-o. Probably should have tried brakes. Oh, like an F1 car. One of the things I love about T's is they're kind of like puppies. They're all just a little different, even when they're all supposed to be the same. So, for example, where you set your spark advance to get it to run right is just a little different on every T. So like on the 14, it runs good halfway, but on this 27, it likes a little bit more movement on the lever there. Throttle feels pretty good. So let's disengage. So that's neutral, so we're not getting any creep. That's good news. We may have broken that blockage of the transmission free. And first gear. Oh yeah! So first gear on a Model T is you push the left pedal all the way down, and we're just going to take a quick spin around this ranch and then we'll get it out on the main road. Okay, first hill. Now hills are kind of sketchy in T's because your brakes are only on the rear axle, especially dirt hills. I guess every hill in 1927 was likely a dirt hill. So we're going to leave it at first. I'm basically going to bring the throttle down. I can even retard the spark a little bit. That's good. All right. And then the brake pedal basically applies pressure to abandon the transmission. Okay, onto the main road. So I'm putting parking brake all the way forward. Let's see if we can get her in a second. Oh, yeah! Second gear, baby! That's probably 70, 85 miles an hour already. At least that's what it feels like. Horn still works. Very important piece of safety tech in the Model T, the horn. That thing drives great. These feel quite a bit bigger and heavier than the early Ts. There's just a lot more sheet metal on these. And a lot more rolling mass with those steel wheels. Got the Armstrong style wiper there. This thing rides like a beauty. We even have some charge there on our amperes and our amp gauge. Oh man, this thing is great. We're gonna have some great adventures in this car. Now, I can't believe we're gonna say this, but the plan is next week, we're gonna try to take this car up Pikes Peak. Completely unproven, been sitting for God knows how many years, taking it up Pikes Peak. Now that's gonna be a grueling drive to over 14,000 feet. So there's some work I wanna do before then. I think we should probably drain the fluids, put some coolant in it, maybe some fresh oil. But even on this hill at 5,000 feet, we're slowing down. Down in a first gear for the hill. Look, it's gonna be an interesting drive. There's no way around it. This doesn't have a ruck still either, so it's only got two speeds. You got low speed and high speed. Oh, okay, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, but we are going to do it. So new fluids and then grease points. There's about 50 grease points on a Model T I have to go through, and I still need to adjust that fan belt, make sure we got our water pump flowing. The temp's coming up a little on the temp gauge. You can actually see that little tiny red mark, but it's not overheating or anything, but I still want to make sure we got good movement of that water pump or the connections to take the water pump off. The car feels great. The Model Ts never really die. There's just no way to kill them. The only enemy of a Model T, the only thing that'll really take them off the road is a blacksmith, because the steel they use in these cars was really thick and really long lasting, so it's really desirable with blacksmiths around the farm and at the ranch. But there's just such simple, incredible machines. I think probably my favorite car of all time, just for what it did to our country and what it means for the automotive industry. They're not fast. They're not really reliable 100 years later because everything is old on them. But if you get one tuned, they will always start, run, and drive, which is very cool. So, yeah, stoked. For $8,000, I think we got a pretty good deal on this car. The original owner is welcome to come over and take it for a ride if she wants. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty impressed. I think maybe we'll tighten up the first gear band a little bit. Get a little bit better engagement out of first, and maybe adjust the pedal so second's a little smoother. But steering feels great, tires are in good shape. It's not the up I'm worried about going up Pikes Peak, it's the down. How about reverse? A little chattery, but it got it. And back into first gear. Yeah, this thing's awesome. Well, folks, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Excited to get Case behind the wheel, see what he thinks.
So, I know that our Model A truck is a little tighter inside than our, well, than like another Model A. Is this tighter than our Model T? Is my legs against the wheel?
It's not super big or luxe in here, that's for sure. So we got this car running with no difficulty, and Case is going to give it a go, see what he thinks. My fellow Model T enthusiast on how the 27 drives. If it's anything like the older 1915 and what he thinks of driving these old Fords.
They're really cool to drive in general. This one definitely feels tighter. It feels more refined. This is like the 911 of Model T stuff.
This is the high performance machine. It really feels like a very different car, for being transparent.
Yeah. It does. The fit and finish, I mean, it looks very different. And of course, the controls are the same. You've got kind of the funky setup for, first and second gear, your pedal layout and all that. But at the same time, it feels a lot tighter.
So one thing you're going to notice is that brake lever actually has another position forward. It goes all the way forward. Yeah, there you go. And that should allow you to get in a second now. Look at the torque!
Huh. We're figuring it out.
Yeah, first drive, right? It's not going to be perfect.
See how the brakes feel on this one. Not good, but maybe better than our 15, marginally.
All right, time to see what this thing is like at speed, unleashing all 20 horsepower.
Let's open it up, Tommy. Oh, wow.
At second. Look at the oomph.
This is pretty good. And would you say that it feels smoother too?
I think it does, yeah.
This one seems like it's got a little bit more tire on it. Ours has really, really narrow, the non-skid tires. This one has slightly more substantial tires and steel wheels as opposed to wood wheels. So I would say it feels less rickety.
Yeah, this feels a lot more like a car than some of like the brass era Model Ts. This feels like something that you could probably take on a drive at 35 miles an hour.
Sure, and we got our top up. I've got a mirror. I've got two mirrors, actually. One of them is just looking at your chin.
A luxury.
That's all it can look at, actually.
Yeah, look, this is actually a much more refined driving experience.
Oh, yeah,
right?
For sure.
It actually feels like a car and not a wheelbarrow. But I wouldn't describe it as any faster. I think that the additional weight of some of the steel slows them down a little bit.
I would say so, but I feel like also our radiator a little bit better on this car than it is on the 1915, so I don't feel as much risk of us overheating.
We've made it almost a quarter mile and it hasn't overheated.
We haven't lost any water, although we are starting to lose steam up the hill here. Might have to go down to first.
Oh yeah. Look at that beauty. Look at her dig. No, this thing's cool, and you really can't kill a Model T.
No, they're so simple.
As long as you've got some spark and some fuel and just a hair of compression, you got everything you need.
My shoe's stuck in between the pedal and the brake.
You got to get that handbrake adjusted a little bit. It's getting stuck on the floorboard.
Yeah, it seems like it, but
That's second.
otherwise, yeah, I mean, we're putting along pretty good. This also sounds a little less rattly, I would say. The motor just seems like the tolerances are maybe a bit tighter.
Sounds like it's less likely to explode at any given minute.
Yeah, the old one really feels like every bit the brass era car. This one, it's surprising at how much it actually feels more advanced. You talk about how long the Model T was around and how it was getting surpassed by other vehicles that were out there on the market. And you, in your head, at least for me, I kind of figured out, well, I guess it was the same car the whole time, no wonder. But they really did put some development in it, especially this being the last year of the Model T.
It's kind of like the Volkswagen Beetle,
Yeah.
or like the Porsche 911 through the 20th century. Like, yes, on paper it didn't change that much, but the little tweaks they made a really big difference in the performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Case, now that we got our first drive in it, I think it's time we drive it up a 14,000 foot mountain.
Yeah, that seems like the logical next step for us.
We've driven it less than half a mile. Let's go take it to Pikes Peak.
That sounds like a good plan for next weekend.
So head over to alltfl.com. We got that video coming soon.